Lemon, bienvenidos a todos, and welcome to our event here today. Just taking a look at everyone joining, thank you and welcome to our inaugural LGBTQ2 plus event in Advanced Air Mobility. This uplifted event has been in the working in progress for quite a while, and we're privileged and honored to have everyone with us here today. As we welcome everyone in, can we just take a moment and pop in the chat where everyone is calling in from? We wanted to gauge a little bit of our geographical diversity in the audience today while we welcome our attendees and let everyone get settled. Excellent. Just looking here in the chat now. Welcome, Claire, Joseph. Oh, Rodrigo, excellent. Thank you. Great to see you. And coming in from New Mexico, some of the Toronto side, okay, and beautiful Montreal. There we go. We got some of the diversity here across the country. To all of our familiar faces and our growing ecosystem, once again, we express our gratitude to your commitment and interest in the advanced air mobility space here in Canada. Your time and effort in just being present here today is beyond appreciated. And to our new attendees here today, simply welcome. Your journey of learning, connecting, and being a part of this brave new future of aviation begins right here, right now. To begin our conversations, we acknowledge that we are hosting this digital event on the unceded and traditional ancestral territories of the Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. We understand that our ongoing work at CAAM spans across hundreds of ancestral territories of the Indigenous peoples of Canada, the United States, and across the world. Collectively, as settlers, we recognize our duty and responsibility to decolonization, reconciliation, and the equitable and inclusive use of our future air resources. Today's event is one part of our annual 3 Uplift series events, which launched with women in advanced air mobility at the beginning of this year. We are continuing with Indigenous wisdom later in the summertime and focusing this series on designing how to move the conversations forward as we build this new advanced air mobility industry together. For those of you new to our ecosystem, my name is J.R. Hammond and my pronouns are he and him, and I am privileged to serve as the Executive Director for CAAM, our federal, not-for-profit, Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Consortium. Behind the scenes working, we have our lead operating officer, Chris Howe, and our CAAM team members of Nishant, Darian, and David joining us here today. For our team at CAAM, we exist to connect Canada and the world through the future of zero-emission flight, specifically with advanced air mobility. We have this vision of flying cars and zero-emission airplanes, redefining how we move people, goods, and services throughout our world. This is not some far-off Jetsons-like dream that we are working on. We have aircraft, routes, and partners planning to launch this new industry just around the horizon, with flights expected to start as early as 2024 in some parts of Canada. Given the lessons learned from traditional aviation, we have the unique opportunity to build equality and diversity into the foundation of this new ecosystem from day one. This is our opportunity and challenge at hand, and we are here today to expedite this work together. For our event today, we'll start off with a fireside chat, followed by 3 conversations hosted by leaders who believe, live, and breathe this work on a daily basis. We'll spend time on questions like, what conversations about this new industry need to occur today in order to bring us closer to that inclusive and diverse ecosystem in advanced air mobility. We make sure that our chat room will be open, as well as the Q&A feature, and will be facilitated by our CAAM team members, and we extend the invitation to engage with our content and conversations collaboratively. On behalf of all of us at CAAM, Women in Drones, and Pride at Work Canada, we invite you, the audience, to be brave and join us on this journey in taking the first step in building the new advanced air mobility industry together. Now, I'd like to dive into the start of our content with our fireside chat. I have the pleasure of welcoming Kimberly Penn, Chief Strategist at Women in Drones, up to the spotlight. Kimberly has been absolutely instrumental in working alongside with us through the Women in AAM event, as well here with us today in our LGBTQ plus event, in joining us in the conversation. Kimberly, first of all, welcome. On behalf of all of us, bringing a quote from our inspirational Dr. Brene Brown, who has mutually inspired us both. Thank you for being brave and stepping into vulnerability with us here today in this space.
Good morning, and good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you may be. I'm very honored to be here today, and I'm looking forward to sharing some time with you, JR, as we get the event kicked off with what I think will be an impactful conversation. So again, welcome to everyone, and thank you for your time in advance.
Excellent. And you know what, Kimberly, let's start off with the insight from your story about the challenges faced in the technology fields and the powerful language of what it means to be brave in this new space.
Absolutely. I started out many years ago in the tech industry, the tech space. And, the tech world has done some great things, and it also has some challenges. One of the things that myself and many others, including particularly Women in Drones, are looking to do is to really learn from some of the challenges that the tech industry has had related to diversity and inclusion. And making sure that although we were initially looking for a safe space for women to thrive in, we are now challenging not only the tech industry, but most certainly in aviation and advanced air mobility to move over to a brave space. And so as we work towards what that looks like, I think JR and I can have some good conversation pieces with each of you in terms of in this fireside chat, looking at, again, how to move from a safe space over to a brave space, and what does that really look like? And so bringing some of my expertise into, AAM and looking for opportunities to build pipelines that are great spaces for many folks, but most certainly the LGBT community in particular.
And you know what, this has been the important language that has come up. And, as a leader in the advanced air mobility space, being privileged to identify as bisexual and a member of the LGBTQ2 plus community, the immense challenges I know I had growing up in a very heteronormative society. Not only was it lonely, not only was there no space or mentors in the professional world to help guide this discovery of where my energy was being spent in trying to find that brave space to really lean into the offering that I had for this world. That energy spent on discovering, learning, and exploring by myself. I've really been trying to look at what we can do together, Kimberly, on building and having visionary leaders present in this new industry from day one, and what that can mean for setting the trends and really making a difference going forward.
Absolutely. In terms of how I identify, she, her, and as a bisexual member of the LGBTQ plus community, that was something that I came into that path later in my adult life. I think that brings some unique perspective in terms of how I shape and build and influence this pipeline into AAM, but also in making sure as a leader, I create opportunities and I challenge those around me to make sure that they have spaces that are, again, not just safe, but also incredibly brave. And so when we look at what safe looks like, it can be a place where people can clearly have, like your background, the ability to put our colors and different pieces in. But we want to challenge our leaders to really look at what brave looks like, right? So brave means you stand up in those meetings, that you think about the staff, the employees, the contractors, vendors, whoever it is that you interact with, and you create opportunities for them that may look different from anything that you've ever done. But strong leadership requires that you not always do what you've always done, but look at opportunities to grow and to lead, right? And so as we look at leader, we definitely want them to feel brave and to understand the community that has already been with their organization, has helped them grow and be successful, are their consumers, and make sure that they have the best relationships that they can by also creating that two-way relationship of the ability to communicate and to effectively understand each other as we continue to navigate AAM, for example.
And that's the important part. This is a continuing discovery process where we know we are okay to be imperfect in that continuous progress forward. But I really just bring the importance back to that space that we can create and having that leadership and brave abilities to being okay on making the errors, holding space, and moving forward together as a group. And I look from my own personal experiences. If that was a quintessential part of my upbringing in having not only the mentors in the professional world to help create that space, watch where that energy could have been spent. Watch what could have been developed from there.
Correct. Yes, it would almost seem like there would be a gap. What we know is that as we have had different allies from place to step, and we've become, the type of leaders, again, that create this really brave space for people to thrive in, we want to make sure that we're developing champions, right? And so allies are great. They're folks that you have interacted with, you have a direct relationship. You look forward to seeing them when you're working on projects and even think of those folks who help you thrive. Now we're looking for champions, folks who can stand up when you're not in the room, when you're not part of a particular project, when you're not in those big board meetings or strategy meetings, and use a voice that you've helped educate them to and really move forward in helping their company and this industry, again, really thrive by being as inclusive as possible. And asking those questions, if you get something, I don't know if there's something wrong, but if you're learning and the education requires struggle, really making sure that you are open to some of the constructive feedback that you may need to be a well-informed, well-educated leader, so that, again, we're creating these really brave champions across the industry and whole.
That's it. And, as we bring it from that more personal interaction side to really our industry impact, Kimberly, we're seeing reports coming out of the United Kingdom on youth between the ages of 12 and 29. Overwhelmingly 50% and more are identifying as not solely heterosexual on the Kinsey scale. This is a massive movement that we need this work to be done today for our future workforce coming into the place. So let's just talk about what does this mean for moving into our brave space, not only on a company basis, but as an industry side.
Absolutely. I know that often many of our companies look to have educational programs and partnerships with K through 12, for example, K through 12, particularly what we use here in the United States, but making sure that we're being inclusive of all youth in those spaces, although perhaps their school systems or their school homes may not necessarily articulate that, but making sure that we're creating the programs for our young people to feel incredibly brave to step in and to take those leadership roles, so that we don't have these gaps between, where you're going, where you go off to university, and now as you head over into the industry with internships and things, you're still trying to develop your voice. Because what I think is they have the voice. We have to make sure that people have the ears to really listen to what these voices have that may sound and look very different and identify differently from what's been the norm, because we're all the norm. It's a matter of making sure that we're, again, as inclusive and brave as possible for everyone to listen and to be heard.
That's it. And we talk about, this upcoming workforce, this youth coming into this new industry, but then we have a massive existing group, a part of the conventional aviation industry. Yet never before in the history have we had this new blank slate to really lay some of the foundational brickwork that we want, pulling off the insights from the traditional aerospace industry and building the new for advanced air mobility.
Absolutely. It's an exciting place to be. For any of you who may be joining us today and you're very junior in terms of the industry itself, we want to build you up and evenly in terms of what the industry looks like, the diversity and inclusion aspect of that, and making sure that we get the resources over to you. I'm really excited to see so many associations popping up across the world that are related to LGBT aviation, for example, and UAS space. And we're looking to make sure that we are strengthening those organizations, making sure they're at the table. And in some cases, maybe they are at the table and they're inviting others to come in and have a seat, to have some of that communication that's really necessary for growth.
So let's play onto your high dream now, Kimberly.
All
What
right.
you see now becomes possible once this safe space and brave space is created?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It kind of varies sometimes. I would like for these types of events, these opportunities to connect and to really feel brave and safe to have this type of conversation, to be something that everyone thinks to attend. And then sometimes I think maybe we shouldn't almost have these types of meetings, because our behavior, our acceptance, who we are in terms of our leadership and our ability to contribute to the industry are not necessarily looked at as a unique environment. But I want us to always feel that we can be inclusive ourselves and make sure that we're, as a community, including others in this space, but also that it becomes part of the everyday conversation in the industry as well. I hope that makes sense. But really just making sure that when the need is there, when the education and the focus is there, when the community and the networking parts are there, that everyone feels welcome to come to the door, ready to learn, ready to contribute, and that, that our space continues to grow. We want to be the change that we see at times, and that can be really challenging as well. But we're all up to task to do that. That's why we're here today.
Beautiful. And let's just build upon that. That's the change that we want to be. And the high dream that we're playing out, not only on our side, but on a personal mission too, is leaning into that space of being that mentor and visionary and helping be on the forefront, so that the lessons that I had to learn lonely and going through my journey cannot be a similar narrative for others. Absolutely. What would that be like to make that the ripple effect through the next generation of the workforce, and to be a leader today in setting that space and progressing? That's what we're trying to envision. And that's what we're trying to make with this industry at the same time.
Absolutely. And pardon me as well. Yeah, the ripple effect, I want us to kick it off into a tsunami effect. Let it not wash us away, but really encapsulate us in this opportunity to learn and, really contribute and make sure that we're developing policies and processes and internships, and that we're thinking of, ways to bring in, vendors and solution providers in this space that we may not have worked with before, who may not have qualified for some reason before, but you're looking to build capacity. And that requires that you do things that you may not have ever done before, but we know that everyone's up to task, especially with an organization and a coalition such as this, where you can really jump in and just really get to know folks and ask the questions that you may really want some background and insight on. We're here for that, and we're here to be heard as well. So, that's some of the goals that we have anyway.
That's it. And let's take that from the incredible location of the United States, where you're currently calling in from, Kimberly, representing Houston, Texas, and our work here in Canada. This does not need to be siloed to a solely geographical area. Watch what we can showcase, as aviation fundamentally itself is a global industry. Watch when we start setting those precedences from day one, the impact and that ripple or tsunami effect that can occur.
Correct. I mean, the internet has changed the world in so many different ways. Many of us are global citizens in terms of, certainly before COVID-19, the ability to navigate the world, travel, participate, in projects, for example. And so, Canada is our northern neighbor, northern in terms of my perspective, way down here in burning hot Houston, Texas. But yeah, the ability to reach across and to build, so that we're really creating, again, this more universal look in terms of how we would like to grow in this space, and again, make sure that the space is inclusive. We don't want to leave anybody behind. We want to lead, but we want to make sure that we're including all the voices, and so that the leadership looks like what we want the industry to really grow into.
Let's build upon specifically this language as we dive into some call to actions, knowing that we have a vision, we know where we want to go, but bringing people along with some specific call to actions is the important aspect too. This allyship versus championship. Give us some insight on this.
The allyship, again, is that direct relationship. If you're managing a department, a business unit, folks that you have really close connection to, our call of action is that you become a champion of those folks that you're a good steward of. And I believe that many management, roles often are, but now we're asking you to make sure that when you're sitting again in those spaces where policies, budgets, and other project aspects are going on, that you really think about those people that you're a steward of, all of those folks, and have more direct conversations, with the leadership that you may have for. So our call of action is to go be an ally, but also be a champion. Speak up in spaces that you have a bigger voice, and make sure that you're being inclusive and really talking about what your people, for example, might need.
Special. And from our side, if we have to put out that call to action, we're going to hold ourselves accountable at CAAM to continue to be the leaders in this space, driving and setting those standards for our future advanced air mobility side, to ensure that not only additional companies, new entrants to the industry understand what those conversations need to be, but continue to surpass us. What would happen if we just set the starting bar and continue to have companies, organization, and regulation start to improve upon the work that we've created? That's the base that we want to start, and allow it to be built up from there.
No, I think that's great. I spoke in terms of the individual and what he or she can do, or they, for example, and you really talked about it on the macro level. And so, working together, we're very honored to be part of the voice, and to do some of this initial call to action. And we know that folks in the audience can really help shape what that call to action needs to be in the coming days and weeks. And so we're looking to hear from each of you as, again, you contribute to this event, and even post this event, what we need to do to really shape what those deliverables should be with our call of action, for example.
That's it. And Kimberly, on all of the work being done currently with your role as Chief Strategist of Women in Drones, this is the starting part of the conversation. We know that it's going to continue going forward. What insight can you give on where you're personally excited for the future of these conversations?
I am really super excited that the industry is open to having bigger conversations of inclusion, for example. And inclusion is, straight across the board. The education components are starting to look different. The drone operators, for example, and UAS, all those are really starting to look different. We see people really asking in terms of what can take place, how can we be more inclusive. At Women in Drones, we're 70% women, 30% men. And so we've got our champions, on board, working very actively to make sure that they are, part of helping women. And so we're just really asking that, people really are open to these aspects. My personal piece is just to see just a room full of everyone able to feel heard and seen, and certainly also able to, generate some revenue from this industry, because it is a business, right? But able to really contribute in those ways as well.
That's it. And I'm just going to reflect and echo that community side. It brings me so much excitement that we can continue doing this work, not in silo, but together. We can learn those lessons, pull upon best techniques, best practices, and not have to create everything from brand new, but build from those incredible resources that are already in existence. And as we'll see from our speakers today, the champions that are leaning into that brave and vulnerable space already in their work.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of our speakers. They're phenomenal. We do believe that everyone will be super excited and come away with some things to think about and to turn into some actionable steps.
Beautiful. Well, Kimberly, on behalf of all of us, thank you for stepping into the space with us, giving us your insight. This is the beginning, and we look forward to many more conversations moving forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, everyone, and let's be brave today.
Excellent. Now, as we transition from that opportunity of speaking with Kimberly Penn from Women in Drones, it gives me the pleasure to welcome our next speaker, bringing in Marlene Conway-Deals from Diversity Development Network of Canada, who's going to be facilitating and moderating our inclusion and lessons in aviation. Marlene has been fantastic and continuing to lean into the conversations across the diversity work that we're bringing into this new industry. And it gives me my pleasure to welcome her on the spotlight and introduce our next speakers. Marlene, the spotlight is yours.
Unfortunately, I'm not Marlene, but I will be stepping in momentarily as she sorts out some technical issues. So I'm so glad to have Tatiana and Jorge here with us. So as soon as I can get Marlene up here, we will certainly have her to facilitate this discussion. But really, I just wanted to take a moment and just bask in how grateful I am to have Tatiana and Jorge here. So as you can see from this slide, a ton of experience here. And we really want to talk about where we are in aviation right now. Where does this stand? And I want to turn it over to the experts, you and Tatiana and Jorge. Who would like to start in this discussion?
I guess I can start if that's okay with you, Jorge.
That's fine.
Sure, yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana Kachira. I am a pilot with Porter Airlines, and as well, I'm an active volunteer with an organization called Canadian Aviation Pride, which is an organization for LGBTQ aviators, and allies. So we define that very, very broadly. If you have any kind of interest in aviation and any kind of interest in supporting LGBTQI plus people in the industry, you're very, very welcome to join. So I believe this discussion today is about diversity and inclusion in aviation as it stands today and sort of where we can grow from here. So I don't know if Jorge, you have any insight into how things have sort of progressed over the time that you've been in the industry?
So, hello everyone. I'm Professor Jorge Albello from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Prior to becoming a professor, I was also in the industry as an airline pilot. So, from the industry itself, we have seen, right, that it's been an evolution where now underrepresented minorities are being a part of aviation as a whole. We have seen an increase. Rather slow, but still an increase of women in aviation. We have seen more acceptance towards our folks from the LGBTQ2 plus community. So there is hope, right, that we are on the right trend, but there's much more that could be done. As far as the students are concerned, in the classroom, we have seen that they're embracive of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. They're willing to have brave conversations and understand that this is a subject that is going to affect their future. From research, I can tell you that we have found that underrepresented minorities, they want to be accepted, respected, and valued. In terms of companies putting in place strategies that support their needs. Same for education institutions. They want to be a part of events that embrace who they are and celebrate their difference as who they are. As for leaders, we typically see bottom-up strategies being put in place, for example, mentorship, networking, and support politics, which are good. But we also have to remember that top-down strategies are equally important. For example, alternative managing strategies, organizational initiatives, and funding towards events like this so that people can come in and learn about what brave and diversity truly means. I could also say that leaders, whether it's in aviation, whether it's in the education side, whether it's in the private sector, leadership has to lead through motivation. They have to motivate their employees, their prospective employees, by setting the example and being willing to embrace all of their employees, all of their prospective employees for who they are and what they bring to the table. Because the more diverse our think is, the better we can see ourselves in the future.
Yeah, I'll just jump in with that. I think that's a really good point about, there's this thing of this notion of groupthink, right? When you surround yourself with people that look and think the same way you do, you don't really get a lot of progress there. You don't get a lot of innovation and creativity there. And so I think, you're absolutely right about saying, surround yourself with people that are different from you, and leadership needs to model that as well, right? So let's see leadership representative of the people that we're serving and the leaders who they're serving as well, and take that level of brave leadership to the next level by spotlighting different people, allowing different people who may not have the opportunity sometimes to lead, or to, maybe it's a public announcement, maybe it's a big event or a big meeting. Let them have that leadership moment to, really express their diversity and be more inclusive in that level as well.
Firstly, I think it's a great point you're making, that diversity and inclusion are not there just for the benefit of the people who are different from most. They're actually for the benefit for the entire organization and the entire industry. I know there is a saying in some circles like special education and so on. I think it comes from education background. My partner is in education, but the saying is things like whatever steps we need to take to make people more comfortable and included are things that are necessary for some, but beneficial for all. And what I mean by that is, for example, when I came to Toronto, to Canada, in fact, in 1998, and I tried to take the TTC bus somewhere, I was so totally lost, because the way the stops functioned was completely different from the way it was in my home country, where the bus would stop at every stop. Here you had to push the button, and I didn't know that, and I didn't know when my stop was coming up. And since then, I have seen so much progress in that all the vehicles now have both the visual announcement and the audio announcement announcing the next stop, making it so much easier. And of course, it is something that somebody who is hearing impaired or somebody who is visually impaired would find a completely necessary thing. But even if you are just not quite really familiar with where the stop is, or maybe you're on your phone a little bit checked out, that would help you as well. So I know it's a very, very kind of small and trivial example in a sense, but I think we can really expand it to much bigger issues in the entire industry. So sometimes the problem is, I think that some people think of things as a pie. If people in this group get more rights or a safer space, then the other group is somehow inconvenienced. But in fact, I think it's the opposite. I think it makes the environment more comfortable for everyone. It makes the performance actually improve. We know there are a lot of studies that show if you have a more diverse, not just a more diverse group, but also more inclusive group, where people who are different from the majority feel safe and brave and happy to express their ideas and share their perspective, you actually end up with a more creative, a more vibrant group that can really push your organization forward in the way you previously thought was possible. And in aviation, especially, a big topic for aviation is safety. I've had a lot of anecdotes from people in CAP, for example, who, when they were, say, operating an aircraft with another pilot, they had been flying along, and the other pilot didn't know that they were gay, for example, and they would use casually throw around the gay slur. And now you're not really even focusing on what you should be focusing on, like safely operating the aircraft. Now your heart rate is going up, your palms are sweating, you're thinking this is not a safe environment for me, right? So I think it's really, really critical for us as an industry to focus on building safe spaces and brave spaces. And this is not just some kind of a, feel-good initiative, but it's actually completely mandatory to make sure that we have a thriving and healthy industry, especially as was pointed out earlier. So many more people are now coming out and identifying as not completely straight.
Well, I really apologize for my internet connection today. I live in the I do apologize for missing the front end of the conversation. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit, Tats, about retention and about how important inclusivity is, and real inclusivity is, for retaining of your good talent now within this community, as well as from a recruiting perspective and a future perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, because it's one thing to attract people, and it's another thing to retain them throughout the years. We know this. I have more statistics for women in aviation than for LGBTQ in aviation, because in part it's a subject that's been more studied. It is a metric that's mandatory to track at this point, as opposed to LGBTQ, which is optional. But we do know that, for example, when it comes to student pilots, the proportion of women in there is not very high, but it keeps getting lower the higher and higher you go. And what we need to focus on is not just attracting more people, but figuring out what it is that they really need to continue to thrive and to make progress in the industry. We see it not just in aviation, we see it everywhere. Women now, again, sorry, I'm focusing on women because that's the statistic I have, but I think actually those figures would be correlated, because if you see more women entering a workforce, entering a certain environment, that means that the classic patriarchal heteronormative environment has been challenged already. So I think there would probably be a fair correlation. So we can see the same with women starting out in universities, for example. They now make up, I believe, more than 50% of undergraduates when it comes to bachelor's degrees. And yet, as you keep going higher into master's and PhD and so on, and then, tenured professors and so on, the numbers continue to drop. So I think what we really have to look at as the industry is to analyze what is truly that, what barriers are there for people who are different in whatever way we're talking about, whether it be LGBTQ or whether it be indigenous or whether it be women, and working on removing those barriers. And as I said before, I absolutely believe that that will make it a much more comfortable and safer and just a better workspace for everyone, and not just the groups that we're talking about.
Thank you. Actually, Jorge, I had a question for you. In a recent Stats Canada June 2021 small briefing on LGBTQ2+, it says that there is 1 million people who are of this in Canada, and that a third of that is youth under 25. Do you have any statistics or what you're noticing from an academic perspective?
I'm sorry, any what? You broke there momentarily.
Pardon me?
You broke there momentarily. You said any statistics on?
Oh, goodness, sorry. I was saying that there is a recent June 21 Stats Canada report, short one, on the population of LGBTQ2, T2+ within Canada, and that a third of that was comprised of youth under 25. From an educational perspective, are you seeing similar numbers?
From an educational perspective, I could say they are fairly similar. Of course, there are certain variables as location and why the students decide to pursue higher education or not in the district, which make the numbers change. But overall, I feel that way the industry is moving, it's being more abrasive and more open-minded towards the inclusion of LGBTQ members. Tatiana mentioned the importance of in the flight deck and how it impacts safety, because historically aviation being that heteronormative industry it is, most LGBTQ professionals, they felt that they couldn't express themselves in the flight deck. Right, the captain might greet them with, do you have any kids? Do you have a spouse? And now they're putting them on the spot to whether come out or play along, and because they don't know if they're going to be accepted or not. For our students, it's somewhat similar. They're looking at their professors' acceptance as they are, so that they have a better educational experience. They want to express their identity in the classroom when they share their opinions. They don't want to be put down, but to be treated as equals, and that their peers also understand that their perspectives are equally valid. At least that's what I've seen in the active classroom with graduating seniors. All they want is an equal participation. They just want to be treated as everybody else in terms of their mindsets and their worldviews. And that's something important in any break space that we might foster. It's to make clear that while we all might disagree on certain subjects, we have to equally listen, right? Actively listen to the other person's perspective. And that's how we move forward, right? Embracing our differences and finding our commonalities to a defined goal. And to make that happen, right, we have to, like has been mentioned before, we have to go from a finite mindset to an infinite mindset where everything comes collectively for a common goal.
So do you think, though, that although industry, who is the primary employer, may wish to have a very inclusive mandate, inclusive policies, they clearly have some barriers in lack of knowledge and lack of tools to really make a difference on the shop floor or in the office environment, because that's where the real retention issues are, where people are not comfortable and don't want to be there. So what kind of tools would be of real help, do you think, to try to help create change?
Well, tools, more than tool, it's more of equitable recognition. For example, employers and leaders should reward behaviors that are productive or that produce sustainability in a diverse environment. So with that reward of, being working towards a common goal, maybe calling for transparency, not only in the policies, but in the cultural environment. Sometimes we think that the policies are the culture of the organization, but not necessarily, right? We might have policies in place that depict diversity and inclusion initiative, but the work environment might say otherwise, or even the leadership organization might not reflect a diverse background. So instead of tools, more towards that mindset of thinking, do we truly depict what we say in our policies?
Perfect. We have just a couple minutes before passing it over to Farzine for the next segment on the program. So I just wondered if Farzine or Tats, if you have some final comments that you'd like to make.
Sure, I can just build on what Jorge was saying. And so, working with the Airport Authority, for example, we have led the space in D&I for a number of years. And that doesn't happen by accident, right? Like, you have to take, like what Jorge was saying, the policies are there, but they don't really come to life until they're modeled, right? Until they're demonstrated in meaningful ways. So, for myself, when I joined the organization, being a gay immigrant Muslim, that's a trifecta of intersectionality, right? But I saw people around me that I knew I was safe with. They modeled it. So I didn't read a single policy before I was comfortable saying, yeah, you know what? I am gay. I am married to a man, things like that. But it needs to be integrity based and meaningful for it, for those policies to actually become, real lived experience, right?
Tats?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of really good points made here. And honestly, I don't have anything better to say than what Farzine has just said. I think he has summed it up perfectly. I think you can write all kinds of policies and you can have lots of stuff on paper, but until you have modeling that comes from the top of the organization, where it becomes very clear that this is actually the company culture and we're not just writing it down to fulfill some kind of, to check off some checkbox somewhere, then it's not going to become reality. I feel very, very lucky and privileged to be working for an employer who I believe is one of the leaders in the industry in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion. And I hope we can continue to grow and build on it together.
Marlene, I think you may be frozen there, but if it's okay, I'll take over. So thank you so much, Jorge and Tatiana and Marlene as well, for that excellent introduction to what we're going to. So now, as we move forward, I'm going to invite Reg and Stella to join us as well. And let's think about language, right? We're doing it today. We're communicating through language. And it's such a foundational way for us to connect with one another. And so, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, whether it's through body language, through written or imagery sometimes, language really sets the tone and it sets our intentionality, especially when we think about inclusivity, right? So what we communicate, it communicates the way we feel, but it impacts people and the way they feel as well. So as we start this conversation off, let's think about, why is language the first step in innovation, in aviation that's important, right? Why do we need to think about language first and then move forward from there? I'll open it up to whoever would like to speak first.
I can offer some thoughts. I think that language is really an important first step for aviation because it acknowledges the diversity of an organization. It conveys respect to all people. It's sensitive to differences. It promotes equitable opportunities, promotes belonging. And there's the business case, of course. Inclusive language attracts and retains a more diverse talent pool. And most importantly, inclusive language puts humanity front and center.
Wow, well put, Stella. I'll only add the space that I work in now, having worked in aviation for the last close to 10 years and now working at a not-for-profit that seeks to build systemic change within the education environment of kids in the K-12 space. Language is equally important there, and trying to build towards people being able to see themselves and be seen for who they are is really critical to their own development. And so language that educators use is just as critical. And so, applying that in the aviation space no differently. How are people getting comfortable and being given permission and being given permission to fail with getting language right, and an inclusive and empathetic sort of environment where if you get somebody's pronouns wrong, or if you say, hey guys, and realize that that isn't really appropriate anymore, how do you say everyone? And in the classroom, hey learners, and how all the different things you can use to be inclusive becomes really critical. And it is habit. You have to practice at it. And I've tripped and fallen many times in this space. And I'll only add, just from a personal point of view, that the learning journey that I'm on, even in the work that I'm doing now, is about understanding, in my case, my own privilege as a white male and as a gay white male, even within the LGBTQ2S+ community. How am I actually using my privilege and really going on that journey? And so encouraging people to be vulnerable is part of that opening of language to be able to apply it in practice.
Brilliant. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, you've both said it so articulately that it's about being vulnerable. It's about practicing and making mistakes, right? That's what we do. We learn by making mistakes. And, certainly, I've been invited to speak to different organizations. And I remember one, I went in to speak with a particular group, and they were leaning on me for my insight. And I walk in the room and I say, hey guys, thanks so much for joining us today. And I'm like, oh, what did I just do? And so I owned it. I'm like, you know what? I'm really sorry. That was a learning moment. I did that intentionally to teach you something, right? But it's like, you got to own it, and you can't make a big deal about it. Sometimes you just got to say, you know what, I fumbled, but I'm learning from it and I'm moving forward. And so, when we think about how this shows up, what are some examples we can think of where language comes up? Right. I'll give the example of the airport authority, for example. When we first started looking at how language was inclusive, we looked at and sometimes disclusive, we looked at our job postings. We said, are we writing these job postings to be fully inclusive, including gender inclusivity and also inclusive of different mindsets, right? Do we really need a degree for this particular role, right? Maybe it's not that. Maybe the educational requirements are different. What about people who are applying from around the world? Is the same standard of practice here the same over there? So, that's how language in one way showed up with airport, and how we've actually, by changing the way we write our job postings, we're getting more diverse candidates, right? And again, Stella, to your point, it's important for the bottom line. It's important for the business, right? So there's a social justice side, but then there's a business side. But I invite both of you to share some examples that you can think of as well.
Well, maybe I'll kick it off, Stella, if that's okay. I'm going to be talking from the education space a fair bit, but hopefully people will see the applicability and have their own lived experience within the education space. And one that I think most people on this webinar will relate to, directly or indirectly, is the epithet that has been around for decades, "That's so gay." And, you know, one of those things that, you know, once it's become a pejorative symbol, people inculcate that. We all know the impact of that is in terms of homophobia and transphobia that can result from that. But it's still prevalent today, and we thought we've come so far. And so, you know, part of what we do in ARC Foundation with Soji 123 is enabling educators, because really we think systemic change comes from enabling the people who have the most direct contact with the people we try and reach, which are the students. But the point of saying that is giving them lesson plans that they can actually do as what's called the teachable moment, in the moment of when that comes up. How do you actually apply that? So I think that's very translatable in the business environment, and certainly in aviation. And part of that, I mean, I'm speaking to having the leadership and alignment, and I'm jumping ahead perhaps to the next topic, but in the sense of how do you bring leaders along in that journey as well, to make sure they're modeling the behavior and not just ticking boxes here and there. So there's a number of ways and strategies you can apply, but it is very applicable from the education space into the business environment.
I wanted to jump back and touch on a couple of points that we've already talked about. So thinking about if you make mistakes, I think that absolutely own it, do it in a respectful way, move on quickly, and also don't expect the folks who are in the marginalized groups to be the ones to educate you and to have to call you to attention for it. Taking responsibility, and then the piece that goes from there, which is do some learning for yourself and make sure that you don't make the mistakes again.
I think I'll harken back. I've been trying to follow the chat here and there, but I think one of the attendees, Chase, talked about empathy. And I think, you know, coming from a place of empathy is critical to understanding. I think, you know, working in the not-for-profit space as I do now, it's often advocates and people who are willing to fight and push for change. There's absolute space for that and absolute appropriateness. But there's also space and importance, I think, in showing empathy and listening, because if you try and advocate and push, sometimes you'll run up against resistance, as opposed to help walking alongside people and really going on the journey with them and letting them air their questions, air their concerns, their fears. One of the insights we have from the education space is that in Canada, 85% of educators already get the what and the why of Soji inclusive education, but they constantly say they need the how because they're terrified of getting it wrong, which shows that they're actually already in the right space of empathy, but they don't want to trip and fall. And it's okay to trip and fall, as everybody's been saying. But how do you apply that in a business space? I don't think it's really that different, but it is about, you know, I'm going to shut up in a moment, because part of it sometimes is about listening. And I mean, you know, really asking those questions. And part of how we built our program is by building alignment with all the education leadership and saying, everybody wants to do this, but let's figure out how to do it that's meaningful, as opposed to coming in and saying, we have a plan for your life and we're going to tell you how to do it. We just listen to what the education community needs. And I think that's very applicable in aviation.
That's excellent. You both touch on really important points that I want to come back to. So Stella, you mentioned that it's not the job of the marginalized group to speak up and to advocate. And Reg, you mentioned about how having the support systems in place, I think for that consistent level of support, so that, you know, the questions are out there, the conversations are happening, but we need to keep them going in a resource sort of based way. And so, you know, I think back to what we did with the airport as well, where we brought in queer competency training, right? Even the word queer, initially when we were pitching this, they were like, oh, can we say this? Like, wait, I thought that was a bad thing, right? And so just having that, I remember sending out the email invites to the first session, and, you know, it said queer competency training in the subject line. And right away I got people saying, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Like, you're going to get fired. And so, you know, it's about having those conversations and remembering that it's up to the champions, as we were talking about before with Kimberly and JR. It's like the allies and the champions. The champions need to take it upon themselves to educate themselves, right? And so you have to create those opportunities as well for people who want to learn, to be able to learn in a way that's not scary, right? So have a brave space, have that conversation where you can say, you know what, ask me anything, I'm not going to take offense, let's talk about it, because then that ripples out, right? So, you know, Stella, maybe you can chat with this, like when you work with Pride at Work and you go into organizations, how does that look? How does that, when you have those first conversations, what are those easy kind of wins that you can show people that who might be scared? You know, here's this really simple thing you can do to make a really big impact.
Sure. Well, first I want to say that language is always shifting. And so it's very common now to use queer, and that's very accepted. But also there's a sensitivity that not everybody in the community identifies that way or sees that as a comfortable word. So one of the things that I would suggest to partner organizations is to mirror back language. So when you're talking to somebody, find out what words they use for themselves and what words they use in their community, and respectfully use those back.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. I just see Tatiana posted a really relevant example of being in grade 12 and seeing the first time she'd ever seen the word she in a math problem about a pilot. And that changed her frame of reference very quickly. And frankly, hopefully it changed other people's frame of reference. So the power of language is clear just in that one example.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Reg, when you think about the work you do with Soji 123, and I know you've created sort of a framework where you connect educators and education leaders, and then they move that forward in providing resources. How does that look? Like, what successes have you found there? What do you think can translate back to every industry as a learning way forward?
Well, at the risk of jumping forward to the next session a little bit, I suppose, with this question, I'm happy to speak to it in the sense that I've talked a little bit about leadership, and I think you know, leadership comes from various levels, and it's not always just you want to have that alignment at the top. Of course, that matters hugely, but I think you've talked about it a little bit yourself. Is going in and listening and allowing people the safe space to talk and to try things out and to trip and fall sometimes, and to learn how to own that. You know, in industry, it's often, you know, fear can be driven by a lot of things, including the fear for your job, being out or being comfortable in speaking about things and speaking up. So how and who and all those things, it is a bridge building exercise at the end of the day. And so I'm very much a bridge builder as opposed to tearing down bridges. But you have to strike that balance as you go through. I think, you know, I'll speak briefly to Soji 123, not so much of its direct applicability, but actually there are probably some parallels. Soji 1 stands for policy and procedures. Again, this is built, the program was built by listening to the education community, the Ministry of Education in BC, the BC Teachers Federation, the Parents Association, the First Nations Schools Association. We have 12 different organizations that lead the province in education. And we just went out and asked them, do you want to be part of this? They all said yes. We formed a dialogue circle. And I'll point that out because my predecessor worked on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada. The point of saying that is that the dialogue circle concept that the First Nations peoples use is a way of everybody coming together without anybody owning power. So how do you create a space where the leadership can come together safely, but willingly? You don't want to drag people to the table or kicking and screaming because you probably are going to have a tougher time. But if there's the will is there, then you create the space for the dialogue. That was fruitful for us in terms of hearing what the needs were. And that's partly what led to Soji 123. So to back up, Soji 1 is policy and procedures. There was excellent dialogue in the chat about how policy only goes so far. But you do need to build that foundation that gives you the backstop, if you will, to being able to respond and anticipate and prevent, ideally. Soji 2 is about environment. And so this is applicable too in business. How do you create a space that's safe, warm, and welcoming so that people can see themselves and be seen in the environment. That's critical to actually that comfort level and actually the productivity and success that people can have, and overcoming mental health issues that can result when you don't have those kind of safe spaces. Farcine, you and I worked on the Queering the Washrooms project in Vancouver Airport, and we went through a whole full circle discussion, working with the queer community, realizing there was no silver bullet here. There was actually a lot of different ways to approach it. But that alone was fostered dialogue within the company about what are we trying to achieve and why. And when we have a cross section of cultures coming from around the world, as airports do, how do you maintain that respect so that people actually do feel comfortable, and where cultural norms are different, that they can still feel comfortable. Soji 3 is about resources. How do you create resources that are meaningful, in this case to educators, that they can use? Not just a classroom lesson plan, which is a lot of what we build based on what they say they need, but also peer-to-peer resources and internal resources that can be used, videos and that kind of thing. So there's a number of ways of approaching these things. And if you have the will, as I know YVR has shown has the will to actually do this, then how do you lift that off the page and put those things into practice? And it does take work. You just can't write the policy and say, good, we're done, and everybody's better now.
I love that there's been so much discussion about policy, because I really think about it as scaffolding. Each of the pieces has to support and reinforce each other. So your policy has to support your training initiatives, has to support your safe space stickers, has to support if you've got an employee resource group or a diversity and inclusion committee, all of these pieces have to go together. And as we've heard already, there has to be buy-in from senior leadership. So back to the point about your inclusive job description, I loved that. I thought that was fantastic. And I thought, and pro tip is then make sure that that job description gets out to your community partners. So make sure that you put that job description out to immigrant serving agencies who have employment services, who may have folks aspiring to be in the aviation field, for example. Put it out to LGBTQ+ organizations. So make sure that the partnerships are there, your initiatives get out there. But all of these things, each and every one of these pieces that all have to go together, have to start with listening to the community. So you can't assume what the communities that you're speaking for to making these policies about, they have to have voice in this procedure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important to think about, there's that saying, begin with the end in mind. It's like you really think about it from that full circle to say, okay, I'm starting here. Do I have the right people at the table, first of all, to inform what it is that we think we're doing? Do we even know what our goals are if we're not really speaking with, like, as you said, the group that you're advocating with, right? And then see how that all goes through, and then, measure it, right? Like, you can set yourself up with milestones to say, okay, we've implemented policy A. Okay, what are we doing to check in to make sure policy A is working? Listen to the people you're trying to serve so that they're telling you, yes, you're on the right track, or no, you need to shift a few things. Right? We did that with the washrooms as well. And, we had a few different iterations of it. And, proud to say, when we first launched this out to the terminal, international terminal, of course, world-renowned international terminal, we had to think about, well, what does somebody coming from a different part of the world think when they see this washroom, an all-inclusive and all-gender washroom? How do you message that? How do you make it translate into any language, to a universal language of pictograms, right? So, we thought about those things. We listened to what the feedback was coming through. We made some changes, iterations along the way. And maybe we got it right, maybe we got it wrong, but we did the work, right? And we kept on doing the work to make sure that it was meaningful. So I love that. So I think we've got a couple more minutes left. Is there anything else that's burning at the top of your mind that we want to get across right now when we talk about language?
I'll just say that I'm following with interest and trying to keep my focus, but also the chat has got some brilliant comments and links that people are sharing. So for anybody listening, if you're not following the chat, there's links you can pick up in there as well. So don't miss out on that. I think we've talked, the theme of this session is language. And I think authenticity goes hand in hand with that. And what does that actually look like? And really part of our mission at ARC Foundation with Soji 123 is to ensure that all students of all gender identities and all sexual orientations can be their most authentic selves. So we obviously target the LGBTQ2S+ space and those students in particular. But one of the interesting things that I want to leave you all with, it's so fascinating, and I'm certain, harkening back to somebody's mention of the Stats Can survey, I'm certain this applies in industry as well. Over the last 20 years, the work that we've done in other organizations that do great work in the education space, it's been shown and proven, UBC has done studies on this, that having a GSA, having Soji 123, having these different things in the school environment actually lifts everybody's sense of safety. It's not just the LGBTQ students that benefit, it's actually everybody, straight identified students or heteronormative students, cisgender, all actually feel more safe at a school. And over time, it actually gets better. It's not just have it or not and you've improved. They've shown longitudinally that it actually continues to improve. So it matters.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, we're at time. I'm going to leave it there and invite Jorge and Tatiana to come in and walk us through the next part of the conversation.
Thanks, Farzine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Hello again, everyone. I will be moderating our discussion on best practices in aviation now, and I guess that would be about what the industry has done already to improve diversity and inclusion, and what it is that we still need to do. It's obvious that best practices in aviation are not static. It's something that's always developing. It's something we're always working on. And I think the fascinating thing is that as an industry, we are uniquely positioned on how to incorporate and how to keep improving these practices, because we are one of the most rigorous industries when it comes to learning from our mistakes and constantly improving what we can do better. Everybody in aviation now has a safety management system where we keep tracking everything and just keep looking about how to improve our operation, make it safer and more efficient. So I think we're coming here with a tremendous mindset already on how to make things better. And I feel that as an industry, we can definitely move it from that purely technical safety perspective into a more social, psychological perspective. So I don't have any particular questions as of yet. I just wanted to see what kind of thoughts you might have on this issue. So I don't know if there's anybody who would like to start, or if you'd like me to pick somebody.
Well, maybe I'll offer just, springboarding from the title of this session, which is Small Steps Towards Brave Leadership. I think one of the things we run into, I'll draw the parallel, and I think everybody can see how it applies in aviation. When we embark in a new school district or school or province, and in fact, we're just starting in New Brunswick this fall, and we have operations in BC and Alberta, we run into a lot of, again, fear, but also concern about how to boil the ocean. And what we constantly, Soji 123 has a ton of different resources and ways to attack the problem, if you will, or the opportunity. But we often just say, let's set out 1, 2, or 3 goals for year one. What is achievable, so you can feel that sense of success and feel that sense of accomplishment and confidence building, so that educators, whether they're an ally or self-identified within in the community, can feel a sense of accomplishment. So I just really encourage everybody listening, is if you're embarking on that journey or part the way through it, is continue making milestones that are achievable, as opposed to trying to do it all, because it can be discouraging to try and get it right off the bat.
Another small step that leaders in the industry could take is to truly develop and embrace an approach that enables them to understand the workplace culture. And this is something very simple that it typically gets overlooked. I'll give you an example. My name is Jorge, and most people mispronounce my name on a daily basis, okay? And I'm pretty sure others here have had the same experience, and either you correct the person, but then after the second, third time, you give up. Well, as a leader, right, recognize that that person identity even begins with their name. So making sure, showing that effort of the right pronunciation you will validate that person in your company. It happens all the time in my classroom. I have international students, and if I don't know how to pronounce their name, I ask them to write it down phonetically for me to properly address them. And that way I give them that validity that I truly care for their contributions to my classroom. And the same will happen in the aviation industry. Make sure that you address everybody and truly embrace who they are. And it's okay to make a mistake, right? Maybe the first 2 times that you pronounce but like we've been mentioning, it's about practicing, right? And practice makes the perfection and truly integrates everybody into that diverse culture, right? We have to model our policies. We have to give that extra step beyond what it's in paper.
Yeah, Jorge, if I can build on to that, you said the word validate, and I think that's so critical. And it's one of those things where you look at brave leadership and it sounds like this really big thing, right? And then, to make it more accessible, I just think back to, what Oprah has said over and over again. And, she's the queen, she knows what she's talking about, but she says everyone fundamentally is seeking to feel seen, to feel acknowledged, right? That's the commonality that ties all of us together. We just want to be validated, right? We want to be shown that we actually are important, that we matter. And the great thing is when leadership knows that, and they take their own vulnerability and their own desire to feel seen and to feel acknowledged, and they empathize with other people that they're leading and their colleagues, and they model that, right? So like you said, learning somebody's name, learning their pronouns, demonstrating that they matter. The really great thing that happens is then conversations begin, right? I'm not concerned now about hiding a part of myself because I'm not sure if it's going to be accepted or seen. Now, that energy that I save in not hiding that part of me, that gets to be expended towards more important things, right? Like productivity, collaboration, innovation. And all of a sudden, the business does better, the teams do better. So, with brave leadership, it can feel like this big thing, but then just put yourself in that position of when have you felt vulnerable, and then go from there, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Farzeen. I think I also have been thinking a little bit about the title of this session because I feel like it can be interpreted in 2 ways. It's small steps towards brave leadership. So on the one hand, we can talk about leadership as in we have the leaders who are at the top of the organization. And of course, it's absolutely critical that they help shape the culture of the workplace, and it can start with the small steps. And yet at the same time, there's also leadership that all of us can engage with in an organization, no matter what our official title is and where we are in the official structure. I don't think leadership is something that's reserved for specific people who are leaders. I think at different points and different times, all of us engage in leadership. So Jorge, you already sort of pointed out a bit of an example of how anyone can strive towards leading with smaller steps. And I was curious if any other panelists had anything to say about how all of us can be leaders and take these small steps to accomplish big results.
Yeah, sure. I can build on that. I think, you said it best when anybody can be a leader, right? It just takes standing up and being more visible, right? And so, I try to model this every day in just, having that moment of like, oh, this is kind of scary, but if I don't say it, who's going to say it, right? And for what works for me is I think about my nephews, right? So, when there's a moment of like, like as a gay person, you're coming out constantly, right? And we've talked about this earlier in the session where you don't know how that's going to land, right? And so I put myself in the position of my nephew and say, well, what if he's debating and battling through sexuality and where he fits into the world? If no one's going to speak up for him, I'm going to speak up for him, right? And so I think for everyone, like my best advice for people is just find what resonates for you. What's going to empower you? And I promise you, once you do that, you'll feel more empowered to empower others, right? So I don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah, and I think it's been said in various ways that it's always a two-way street. We're here gathered as an industry looking at LGBTQ2S plus inclusion and how to foster that. But you really have to be able to walk in other people's shoes as well. And oftentimes I think we have that privilege of having understood what it's like to be marginalized. And I think the other piece that we need to keep in mind is, as we focus on this particular subject area of identity, keep in mind that intersectionality with other types of identities is so critical. And if we're going to advocate and push for our inclusion, we need to be lifting up others along the way. The example I'll give from what we do in Soji 123 is that we are just embarking on a journey with the First Nations Schools Association in BC here to try and adapt our program to be more culturally competent. And that involves listening to that community and bringing them to the table to tell us how it should be done, not for us to say, we think we know how we should do it. And here you go. And we're working with, you'll be interested to know, we're working with the Christian schools community right now. And it's a two-way street. We can't just go and bang down the door with them. They've come to us and said, help us. So good on them. And so we have to meet them where they're at. And they've got some real challenges, but they are willing. So, think of those things within your own company, within your own industry, of how you can bring people along and bring them to the table in the everyday, at your desk and in your work team kind of thing, but also how you taking that leadership position that Tatiana's asked about, and then also how that can move itself across and up and down the chain by walking the talk.
I will close by saying that beyond modeling what's in the policies, beyond validating each of your employees, your students, your prospective employees or partners, and building that empowerment within your company, it's making sure that all your actions also bring justice, right, to those who have been underrepresented, that what you do truly improves the industry, truly improves your company towards a better tomorrow.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jorge. I guess then I did also want to address now the other side. On the one hand, yes, we are all leaders and we can all be leaders. On the other hand, the ones who are actually at the top of our organizations have, believe, more of a responsibility to model a safe and inclusive culture for everyone. And I know there are quite a few participants who are watching us here today, and I'm sure there are many people who are either already leaders in their field or many future leaders. And of course, we touched upon this already, but if you are thinking about just a few very powerful, concentrated words of advice on what you can do specifically as an organization leader to take these steps. I don't know if there is anything that pops to mind that you would like, as sort of a message that we'd like to say to them. I don't know if anybody wants to start.
There's a number of things that have been said probably already that are applicable here, and I might harken back on a couple, but that leadership component at the senior leadership level is really critical. We all know that no matter what thing you're trying to advance in any company, having buy-in from senior leadership for policy X or initiative Y are really critical. But I think, when you kind of look at your environment and try and figure out is start to look for those allies and those people who will be willing, because executives are busy. They may be distracted by every other thing. And of course, they're trying to make money. That's kind of the business model they're probably living with. So you have to find the allies, and oftentimes it may be through HR, but not necessarily. You want to have those conversations, find ways to move the conversation up the chain, and make space for the dialogue and give them permission, because oftentimes they may be willing, but they may not be willing to put the space and time in. So you have to figure out how to wedge that forward a little bit. And part of that includes demonstrating, whether it's through statistics, some of the great links that have been provided here, demonstrating through example and initiatives, or prove it kind of initiatives that help them come on side to make it a bigger priority. So proof is often a really important piece of the puzzle. Seek for those those pilot projects, so those kind of things that you can put into motion that helps demonstrate the value of exercise X or Y. Farzine spoke to the, queering, the queer seminars that were offered to help create the dialogue. Those little baby steps that help show the momentum, and then by proving it, you help build some credibility into it. We all probably on this call are already nodding heads on the notion of diversity matters and how it actually builds better outcomes. Help leaders see that. Find out ways that you can show that to them and that they can be a part of it and engaged, and then take the priority on for themselves and own it.
I will say that we know that truly fostering a diverse environment could be complex at times, but for top managers, it should be to extensively involve, to truly show that involvement, to reduce the stereotypes that those at the top tier, are almost untouchable. Show that you're human, that you truly care for the contributions of your employees. Validate their contribution, recognize their contributions, and recognize how it has improved your company and your work environment. Because if you show that, then your retention will be higher, and even your recruitment, right? People will want to work for your company because you truly validate who they are.
Yeah, and something we've said so much throughout this is empathy, right? Have empathy for your leaders too, right? Empathy for the fact that as leaders, they're expected oftentimes to know everything, and they don't. They're human, right? And so I would find a way to be creating spaces where they can feel vulnerable, safely vulnerable, to ask the questions that they have, to learn what they need to learn, to make mistakes and own their accountability in making those mistakes, but have a way in which that they can feel safe, so that then once they get it, they can model it in a really authentic way. To everyone's point about how that shows up for and it trickles down to the employees, but also outside of the organization, because of course everyone talks, right? So if we can start modeling this in really authentic ways, and we have leaders that are feeling empowered to do so, then that improves the bottom line, improves retention, improves recruitment, improves everything, right? And it furthers our social justice sort of cause. But let's not forget also that everyone needs that empathy and that space to be vulnerable in a really safe way. And if we can all just create that for each other, then we collectively move forward together.
I think the other thing just to acknowledge, and I don't think I'll be surprising anybody by saying this, but be prepared for some resistance, not just at the senior leadership level, or some discomfort that isn't just, it's new to me and I'm not sure how to be. It's actually some people that may be resistant or reject this kind of initiative. It doesn't matter if it's from a certain religious point of view or a cultural point of view or a generational point of view. There may be lots of different things that inform where people are coming from. So, you can't just ignore those people or expect to drag them to the table and say, thou shalt. It's probably not going to be as successful. So again, I go back to part of what Farzine said with empathy, but partly, how do you make space at the table for those people to be able to say, look, I don't like this, or I'm uncomfortable because my culture, my religion, my whatever says so. And so half the battle we found when we talk to parents in the community who are concerned about Soji 1, 2, 3, and believe you me, it happens. What's amazing sometimes, and not always, but sometimes, is just giving them the space to vent, and they go off about their fears and their frustrations and why they don't agree with it. And in our case, we just come back to the notion of, well, do you want all the kids to be safe? Of course. Do you want kids to be able to be comfortable with who they are? Of course. And establish the commonalities there. And what we found is that actually the resistance really, comes back down. Doesn't mean you'll always have everybody on side. I don't think it's realistic to expect 100%. Policies can drive the behavior that's expected, but really you want that authenticity. And so that really means doing the spade work of listening to those pockets that may not be so cool with what you're trying to do.
Sorry. There we go. That's an absolutely fantastic point, Reg. Thank you for bringing it up. I think it's really, really important. I have a personal anecdote myself, and where my partner, who is a teacher, was leading workshops in her classroom on different human rights. And one parent said, Ms. Tasha, we're Muslims, so we're happy to do all these rights, but can we just omit the LGBTQ one? And of course, as a gay teacher, that's a hard conversation to have, but she handled it with such grace, saying, just bring up exactly the points you were saying, look, do you want your kids to be safe? What if somebody came in and said, we can do all these points, but let's not do the Muslim? And it's as if the light bulb went on. And I think that's how we really make allies. Thank you so much for the contribution. I think it's fantastic. I think we have about a minute left. I don't know if anybody has a final remark to close this with, any kind of final burning thought, or if we should wrap it up here.
I'll just say that, somebody much more smart than me once said, the longest journey begins with one step. And people are already taking it. Clearly, you're here at this webinar, which says you're already on that journey or taking the step. And just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And you'll go 2 steps forward and 3 back and 2 to the side along the way. And maybe even get beat up a little bit along the way. So it does take persistence, but come at it from a place of joy, a place of positivity, and a place of listening and wanting to meet people where they're at, as I've seen in the chat, people saying over again. So I just really encourage people to keep going with the journey. It's not always easy, but it's happening and it's real.
That's wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. And a great way to transition into our final conclusion today. I've been writing down notes as quick as possible on the conversations moving from that psychological safety to the actual physical safety of piloting an aircraft. Our look at between having just policy is not sufficient enough, but having the modeled work culture to build upon that scaffolding which the policy creates. The importance of our language in leaning into how we're showing up and being okay to be on that learning process together as we make those errors, and then summarizing that with the policy, environment, and resources side. This is what our speakers have presented today in our attempt and continued process to be seen, felt, and acknowledged in our journey. So one of our favorite ways that we like to conclude events like this that we've learned from the inspirational Tira Frazier over at Isqueo Air is to really bring our speakers up to stage, have 2 breaths to just center ourselves, and focus on 2 words that summarize our emotions towards this event. So I'll invite our panelists and the attendees to just get comfortable. We're going to take 2 breaths to just center ourselves after this conversation today. The nice inhale and an audible exhale. And one more for an inhale. And our audible exhale. And we're just going to go through, I'll start at the top of my screen with Farzeen. 2 words to summarize your emotions towards today's event.
Grateful and optimistic.
Reg?
I'm going to use an aviation analogy. I feel lifted or aloft, and soaring.
Tatiana?
The 2 words that kept coming back to my head are, the 2 themes are empathy, because I think it's absolutely critical, an entire foundation of what we do here, and process, in that things don't have to be perfect, but we're going to keep figuring them out together.
Great. Jorge?
2 words that keep coming to my mind are empowerment and justice. I feel that today we have created a space in which some of our attendees can resonate and can see themselves and feel safe that there's people out there that truly care for them.
Special. Stella?
Hopeful and gratitude that there's so many people here today, that these discussions are happening, and that the industry cares about what happens with diversity and inclusion and with their people.
And Kimberly?
I'm going to go with, let's see, listen and learn.
And from my side, the ones I have written down here are community and connection. And the important news is that we have our emails going out to continue on that connection side with the insights, the next steps, and the action points to start making a difference in your ecosystem. So from all of us here, thank you for spending some time with us today and building this space with us. To our incredible speakers, thank you for stepping into this brave space with us. And we look forward to making a change for the next tsunami of innovation to come in this new industry. Have a great day, everyone.